Milana, if you were a politician, what would you represent? And if you could pass any law, what would you pass?
To be honest, I'm really far from the politics and I don't really know a lot of politicians, so I'm not really sure what politician I would be. But in terms of the laws, I think I would be really interested in changing the educational system or the curriculum that is taught in schools. And Hillary, what about you?
To be honest, I hadn't thought about the education system, but for me, I'd pass a law where there would be no work on Fridays.
Mm.
And the party I would represent is the Green Party because they seem to care a lot about the environment. Hi, everyone, I'm Hillary.
I'm Alana, and this is Migrant. Welcome to another episode. We'll be exploring being a female in politics right now and what inspires people to get into politics in the first place.
And to help us explore the muddy waters of politics, we have the guest speaker, Mandu Reid, leader of the Women's Equality Party UK. We'll also be speaking about issues happening right now. Hi, Mandu. I'm so glad to have you here with us. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Hello, how are you doing? I'm really pleased to be here. I've been looking forward to this for several weeks now. Yeah, you said it. My name is Mandu Reid. I'm the leader of the UK Women's Equality Party. I'm the first person of colour to lead a national political party in British history. And the Women's Equality Party is the UK's first and only feminist political party. That means our focus is 100% on equality between men and women and making that happen as fast as possible.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you, Mandu. You're such an inspirational figure. So we're so glad that you're here. So I think my first question would be, as a politician, if you could pass any law, what would it be?
Oh, you know what? Distilling it down to one law is really, really difficult to do. Really, really
Yeah.
difficult to do. But since my job is to move things forward as fast as possible to a world where men and women are truly equal citizens, I would pass a law that brought in, and this might sound strange, but bear with me, that brought in free universal childcare for everybody in this country, because in the UK, we have the most expensive childcare in Europe, second most expensive in the world. And what that does is it really squeezes women. It means that women struggle to do caregiving, which they're not paid for, and stay in their jobs. And it doesn't squeeze men in the same way. So if you brought that in tomorrow, I promise you, within half a generation, you would have changed society for the better because you'd have more women able to stay in the workforce, make career choices that suit them. You'd have their talents in every single industry. You'd have more women in senior positions making the decisions, and that would have a positive effect across society. So I would bring that in tomorrow because it would change our economy, our society, stereotypes, and make everything way more equal than it is now between men and women.
I didn't think that childcare would have such a huge impact until you explained it in that way, in the way that it limits women from being in the workforce. And I think that's an amazing law. We actually met at a youth conference, and I think it was inspiring for me to hear a female of color who's leading a party in the UK to speak from a place of power. So it's just a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here because all of our work is about the generations coming after. There's literally no point in doing this if we don't make things better for you and your younger siblings and people who are even younger still. I want you women to inherit something better than what women of my age and older had to deal with. So I'm the one who's lucky today to have this conversation with you. Thanks for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So Mandu, what would you say inspired you to get into politics?
Oh, wow. It's really funny because um, I'm 41 years old and I didn't see myself when I was much younger as somebody who would end up in a political role. And part of the reason for that is I spent most of my early career working for politicians. For example, I spent 8 years working for Boris Johnson when he was the mayor of London, you know? Um, and I worked for other mayors of London too. I wasn't working for him because I supported him. I just worked for him because I worked at City Hall. So I'd seen up close, um, frankly, how badly politicians behave and how often what you get is talk rather than serious commitment to making change happen. And so I felt in my younger years that politics wasn't for me in terms of a job or something I wanted to like really give my life to. And then in 2015, when the Women's Equality Party was founded, which incidentally is the same year that Jeremy Corbyn came to power, and he's kind of nowhere now, and the Women's Equality Party is still here, which I think is a really big deal. When the Women's Equality Party was founded, I realized that we had a chance to do something that really focused on bringing equality front and center. A lot of the other parties talk about it, but what they don't do is follow through. A lot of the other parties and politicians only remember that women exist on International Women's Day, but the rest of the year always kind of have excuses and reasons for why equality is not the top priority. So when the Women's Equality Party was founded, I saw a chance to put everything I believe in into practice, because my real kind of like priority is for us to move to a world where men and women are truly, truly equal citizens. I want to live in a world where male violence against women doesn't exist. I want to live in a world where women's talents are appreciated in the workplace, in the same way that men's are. But none of the other parties were taking that seriously enough. None of the other parties were ambitious enough. So I decided when the Women's Equality Party came along to take an interest, to get involved. And then it was this rapid journey, which should give you two young women a clue that, you know, things can happen fast when you put yourself in the right place, when you take a shot at something. And so I joined the party. I became a spokesperson. The previous leader stood down, which was unexpected. And so they were looking for a new leader. And I got approached, and I debated with myself whether I should do it. But I decided, you know what? I believe in these things. I care about these things. And I need to move from, words to a place where I'm actually doing what I can to move things forward. So I really went on a journey from thinking politics wasn't for me to realizing that actually, if you want to make change in the world, sometimes you've got to throw yourself into it. So that's what
Oh
happened.
yeah, that's great, honestly, because one of the questions we wanted to ask was, did you always know that you wanted to be a politician? And your answer is incredibly showing that we can start somewhere, have no ideas about our future, but then end up in the right place, which we were never expecting. And, it's clearly showing that your passion and your kind of lived experience as a woman, like showing through your work, and like it's incredible how much you like determined and devoted to your work. So yeah, as young women, we are really inspired. Me and Hillary, I'm sure, like Hillary, you agree, because that's amazing.
Yeah.
Mandu, were you ever scared of getting into politics? Like, what was your view about it?
Oh my God, I really was. And I'll tell you why. As I said, I worked for politicians, and I've always been interested in and curious about politics. So, what that meant is that I've seen what happens to women when they put themselves forward for these things, and what happens particularly to Black women when they put themselves forward for these things. We live in a social media age, which has real benefits and advantages. Of course, it's so much easier to connect with people, with a broad range of people, with a broader range of people than it used to be when I was growing up. But the downside is you're so exposed, and it's so easy for people to hide behind their keyboards and throw abuse out, and women are on the receiving end of so much more abuse than men, any women who are in the public eye. We get rape threats and death threats, and I've had people say they want to come round to my house and kick over my bins just because they didn't like something I said on social media, that kind of stuff. And so I was nervous about it, but at the same time I found myself thinking, well, the hostile environment for women, if we allow that to kind of keep us out of politics, the pace of change is going to be even slower. So it does make me sad. It does, forgive my French, piss me off that women have to accept a higher price than men do for putting themselves forward. But I just felt that um, I would have to kind of overcome that fear. And there's a quote from an amazing woman. Her name is Anais Nin. She's an artist many decades ago, and a thinker and a philosopher. And she said, "Life shrinks or expands in proportion to your courage." life shrinks or expands in proportion to your courage. So basically, the greater your courage, the more you grow, the bigger your world becomes. The smaller your courage, the less you grow, the smaller your world becomes. And so I allowed that to sort of nudge me over my fears, over my hesitation, over everything I thought could potentially go wrong. It nudged me past that, and I thought I'd give it a try. And I'm glad I did, because I've learned a lot. It's not easy all the time. It's pretty exhausting at times, but it's so rewarding, because not everybody gets to do work that's meaningful and has a chance to make a change in the world. And so, even though it's harder for women, and it shouldn't be, and that's not fair, I felt it was worth trying to overcome some of those hardships for the chance to do something that made a difference.
Thank you. For other people listening at home and want to also get into politics and are females like you, how did you first get into politics in the first place?
Yeah, a little bit like I said, kind of by accident. It was linking what I believe in. I've always believed in equality, although I have to be truthful with you. Gender equality wasn't my kind of like first understanding of where action to make the world more equal was required. I grew up in the final years in Southern Africa, in the final years of the apartheid regime. So that was in the mid to late 80s and early 90s, when apartheid was sort of crumbling. It was still holding on, but it was crumbling. And, you can probably tell from me that I have mixed heritage. My mother's a Black woman from Malawi in Central Africa. My father's a white Englishman. And so living in South Africa at that time, for me, the fight for equality that felt most urgent was the fight for racial equality. And I'm a little bit embarrassed to say this, because I'm now the leader of the Women's Equality Party. I was a late developer when it came to feminism. I actually believed the lie that the work had been done, because women would get the vote, and you can, if in theory, you can work in any profession. I believed all of that stuff when I was a much younger woman. You two are way ahead of me when it comes to your feminist consciousness. And I'm so proud of young people like you, because you are already awake to some of the things that need to be done and need to change. It took me into my mid-20s before I really understood that, yes, racial equality is important, but so is gender equality, equality between men and women. I was slow to kind of realize that. And when I realized it, that politicized me. It moved me to a place where it wasn't enough to just sit there and chat with my friends about what I believed in. I wanted to find a way to roll up my sleeves and get involved. And so in 2010, I actually joined the local Labour Party, because the coalition government had just been elected, and I knew what they were going to do. I knew that austerity would come. It would slash and burn services. I knew women would suffer. I knew people of color would suffer. I knew disabled people would suffer most. So I wanted to get involved. But linked to what I said earlier, I found in the end, at that time at least, my local Labour Party wasn't, in my view, focused enough on gender equality. And that was something I wanted to see more energy and action into, which is why I've now ended up in the Women's Equality Party and leading the party.
That's amazing. As a female, especially as a female of color who's in politics, we know that being in politics and being a female and one of color is harder. What do you say that politics needs to do to be more inviting to the next generation of people who also want to get to politics that are not white males?
Number one, listen to them. And not just listen to them as a PR exercise. Listen to them, to the young people, to marginalized young people in particular, and take on board what they say matters. Because at the end of the day, and you'll find this too when you're my age, when you're in your 40s, your work is about the next generation. Because let's say my campaigning for the next 5 years is super, super successful. The real benefits of that are for the generations coming after. So if we're not listening and then acting on what young people care about, believe in, want to see change, then we're serving ourselves and we're not serving our communities in the best way we could be. I also think the rest of the UK should follow the example in Wales, where young people get to vote from age 16. I really think that matters. Look, it's the hottest day of the year today, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
It's not a hot day by accident. It's a hot day, and there's wildfires across Europe because of climate change.
Yeah.
Now, guess what? I will die before the worst effects of climate change are realized. You two are going to be living with that. So young people should be able to vote. And if young people age 16 and up could vote across the UK, I promise you, you'd see a different type of government getting elected every time there's election. I promise you. And that government would be a government that has a mandate from young people to do the right thing for them. So two things. We could talk all day about all the things I think need to be done to make politics more accessible and responsive to young people. But those two things are big things. Listen to young people, act on what you learn, and make it so that more young people and more younger young people get a chance to vote and have a say in our country's future, because they will inherit that future. That's what I think.
Absolutely, yeah, we definitely agree. And Mandu, you founded a charity called The Cup Effect, which provides menstrual cups for women struggling with period poverty, which is just incredible. So, what prompted you to take such action in the first place?
Yeah, I've mentioned my mom already, haven't I?
Yeah.
My mom is originally from Malawi, and she didn't grow up in a privileged family. She grew up in really modest circumstances. You know, she literally got her first pair of shoes age 15. And she was the 10th child of 10 children. Um, and it was a struggle when she was growing up. And she, when she reached puberty and started her period, it wasn't easy to manage that in a comfortable, healthy, dignified way. She had to use pieces of cloth that were washed, um, uh, every night and then hung up to dry, and they get all crunchy when they dry. So when she'd use them the next day, she'd get like chafing, and it was really, really horrible. She was embarrassed because sometimes there'd be a smell, all of this stuff. And that was what was going on for her. Then I, many, 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 many years later, discovered and learned about menstrual cups. Menstrual cups are amazing. They are an alternative to pads or tampons. They're made of medical grade silicone, and each one, you reuse it, lasts for 10 years. Genuinely, I've used my menstrual cup.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I've used mine for 10 years. And I found myself thinking, hang on a minute. Why have I only discovered this thing in my 20s? It must be a new innovation. I discovered that menstrual cups were first invented in the 1930s. And I thought, what? Why aren't all of us, not everyone might want to use them, but why aren't we all at least aware and able to make an informed choice about them? And the answer, guess what? Nobody can make money out of a product that's reusable and lasts for 10 years.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? So all the and it's usually men who are in charge of the big companies that sell us Tampax and Always that are obviously disposable. So we got an environmental angle here too. Tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of waste is generated by using disposable products. And if everyone or more people used menstrual cups, it would take a big slice out of the profits of those companies. So there's no incentive for them to be promoted as an idea, as an option. So when I click those two things together, my mum's experience as a young woman, the fact that this option exists, which is good for the environment, I personally found it way more comfortable, way more clean, way more convenient than anything I tried before. I just thought, I'm going to try my best to spread the word about this as an option, not forcing anybody to use it. If you don't want to use it, that's fine too, but giving people the chance to make an informed choice. I thought that's got to be done because, hashtag capitalism was never going to encourage a situation where more people would hear about it and have the option to use it because it would slice down the profits. So I thought I would try and do something that short circuits that. So yeah, I started doing training sessions and awareness sessions in very low income communities in Malawi, where my mom's from, and East Africa, and then also in the UK. Partnered up with lots of other organizations, an organization called Bloody Good Period. They're still doing lots of great work, tackling period poverty. And yeah, it's an example of a way you can use your experience and share that experience and knowledge to make change that could make a huge difference in an individual's life and in the life of a community. So yeah, it was one of those stories where something about what I learned, I was able to connect with a bigger problem and try and bring a solution to life by doing something that nobody else is doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. As someone who moved to the UK from a young age, from a different country, how was the change environment for you? How did you adjust?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a shock to the system to begin with, just because it took a while for me to get used to living in a country where, as a person of color, I'm in the minority. The countries I grew up in, black people or people of color are in the majority, right? And South Africa, okay,
Yeah,
maybe at the time when I was there as a younger person, the minority white people were in charge, but still the majority of people were black people. And so it really took me some time to get used to the fact that here I was a minority, and at the time things have got a bit better. I was on the receiving end of racism and discrimination. You can probably still hear I have a slightly strange accent. It
yeah,
moves around a lot. At the time when I first moved back, my accent sounded a lot more like a foreigner's accent. And
yeah,
at school, people would sort of ridicule me for that. Um, and as you know what it's like when you're a teenager, that stuff can make you feel isolated and alone. And so I had to learn to deal with that. In some ways, now that I'm older and I look back, I can see that it made me the person I am, and I've kind of grown stronger on the back of some of that, and I've learned to adapt, which is an amazing skill to have.
yeah.
Being adaptable in lots of different environments, even though I had to endure some stuff that was hard to get there, it's something I'm now grateful for. But yeah, it did. It wasn't straightforward. I I had a period of feeling really sad because I did feel alienated, and it took me a while to make friends and be accepted. But got there in the end.
You mentioned feeling alienated and difficulty making friends from first moving here. As a person of color as well, how have you dealt with those ideals of ordeals of racism?
You know what? I thought I dealt with it really, really, really well until June 2020, when George Floyd was murdered and we were in lockdown. And I think
Yeah,
being in lockdown meant his murder and how it happened was a lot more in your face than it might have been if you're going about your day-to-day business, because we were at home consuming a lot more news, a lot more like digital content, because we were society was closed down. And so it really hit me hard, and I know other people experience the same thing. And one thing it made me understand is that one of the things I had been doing to cope with racism through from, let's say, my sort of late teenage years up to the age I am now, is to sort of, here in the UK at least, pretend that it didn't bother me, you know? And I also know that I had developed, without realizing it, habits around bending and flexing myself and what I say, particularly when I was in the company of white people, if the topic of racism came up, to sort of make them feel comfortable, and when George Floyd happened, his murder, I just had this realization that I'd been paying a price for all that time. Whereas trying to hold it in, trying to act normal, trying to kind of tough it out, trying to change what I say and what I do in certain contexts to sort of keep people who I thought might be offended comfortable. And so I stopped doing that. As of June 2020, I decided that it wasn't worth the price I'd paid. And it was actually probably contributing to a slower pace of change than I would like. Um, yeah, so a really horrible thing happened that I know affected lots of people really badly around the world, but it gave me an awakening around how actually just sort of swallowing injustice in the end, you know, eats you up. And so I don't swallow racial injustice in the ways that I perhaps had been doing anymore. I don't do that
Yeah.
anymore. And I will call it out and I will talk about it and challenge it where I see it happening. I don't put energy anymore into worrying about people being offended or not liking me. If I, you know, want to be honest about that stuff. I wrote a few pieces around that time. I wrote a letter to Boris Johnson because I did have the feeling. Remember what happened with George Floyd when he was murdered? I think his last words were, "I can't breathe." And I remember feeling a sense of that in
Yeah.
myself. Obviously, not literally, but like as an atmosphere around me. And I wrote a letter to Boris Johnson explaining how the racism that exists in our country
Yeah.
makes a lot of people of color here feel like they can't breathe. And so it was a real turning point, I think, for me. And I didn't know that I had been swallowing it. I really didn't know.
Yeah. Thank you for that insight. I get what you mean by swallowing things up, and I think just not addressing issues can have a toll on mental health, amongst of other things. And there's sometimes just an event that prompts you to into action, and it's the fact that you responded instead of ignoring it.
Yeah, but it took a really big thing, a really horrible thing
Yeah.
for that to happen. But we all go on a journey and you never know what's around the corner, right? And how that's going to help you see the world differently.
Outside of politics, what are you passionate about in your free time?
Oh my goodness, I love cooking. I really, it's one of my job's quite stressful. That's politics for everyone, but particularly
Yeah.
politics if you're doing something that's really challenging the status quo. So feminist politics is challenging the political norms. So it's like double, triple stressful because of that. Um, and one of the ways that I really do unwind is, go into the kitchen, put some music on, and actually spend like a good hour and a half or whatever, just like cooking and experimenting with things. There's something like hypnotic about, don't laugh at me, but like chopping vegetables. Do you know what I mean? Chopping
Yeah.
onions, chopping carrots. Something about it that, like, for me, just helps me de stress. And then most of the time, the end product's pretty good too. Like, I'm a good cook. And so usually you spend all this time in the kitchen, you chill out, you let
Yeah.
off steam, and then you've got something delicious to show for it at the end. It's one of my favorite things. I also love being cooked for. So it's not just a one-way street with me when it comes to
Yeah.
food. This food is a big theme, isn't it? I love restaurants. I love trying new food. Yeah, that is probably my top way of unwinding. And I'm also a bit of a readaholic. I read a lot of books.
Yeah.
Um, that helps me chill, and I'm such a curious person, and so through books I can like indulge my curiosity and explore different worlds, and in a way that isn't stressful. Yeah.
What would your advice be to listeners at home who are passionate about a cause and perhaps wants to get into politics but they don't know how?
um, my advice would be, please
Mhm.
do it. You said if they're passionate about something, we need more people who are drawn to politics, who are drawn to public service because they care, not because they want to seek power or self importance. So, definitely, if there's a strong passion there, that's the first sign that you'd be great, you'd be needed, you'd be welcome in the world of politics. How to get involved? That's tricky because what we find in a lot of mainstream politics is quite a sort of narrow approach to who gets a seat at the table. Now, I'm the leader of the Women's Equality Party, so I'm obviously going to tell you that that's one of the ways my party is completely different. We really want to see people who are usually invisible. We want to see those people center stage. We want to pass the mic to the kind of voices that are normally excluded and left out. So getting involved in the Women's Equality Party is probably a good fast track. And we're the first political party that's got a strong presence on TikTok. We've got something like 180,000 followers, and
Wow.
our content is really like dynamic, right? And we've done that because I'm serious about what I said like 10 minutes ago about how young people are a really, really important audience. We know young people, to be honest, are probably a bit addicted to TikTok, some of them, and maybe even in a problematic way. But nonetheless, you got to go where the young people are. And so that's why we were the first party of all the political parties to have a good presence there. We do stuff that is informational. We create opportunities for people to engage and dip their toe into activism. For example, we just a couple of weeks ago put an open call out for people who wanted to challenge the government on abortion rights and reproductive rights in this country, because they were looking under threat after what happened in the USA recently. And so we put out a call for anybody who believed that was important to join us. At the same time, it was on a Tuesday, to call up the Prime Minister. We got his number, and 4,000 people signed up, and they flooded all of his inboxes with messages showing that they believe this matters, and they're not going to let him get away with not taking the issue seriously. So that's a way you can just dip your toe into activism and see how it feels using your voice in that way. We gave people a guide as a script, and they could also use their own experience or their own voice to craft what they said. But we try to give people stepping stones to getting involved. And yeah, we encourage people to see themselves as a valid voice. So yeah, I do think if you're tentative or hesitant about taking part, social media and Twitter can be quite horrible, but I do think TikTok and Instagram are really good places to start to sort of hone your voice, hone your message, share with other people what you believe in, and get involved in campaigns that don't require you to go from zero to super high pressure situations like an interview on Sky TV or something like that.
Thank you.
No
That's
problem.
so useful, Mandu. Thank you. So to close off, could I just ask you what has been the highlight of your week?
The highlight of my week, well, it's only Monday, so I'm going to go back to last week. This Monday's been fine, but it's been pretty hot.
True.
So the highlight of today has been keeping cool, or just about managing to do so. Last week, the highlight of my week was meeting with a young woman. She's youngish, who's working as an IDVA. That's IDVA, and it stands for Independent Domestic Violence Advisor. Now, I met with her round near where I live here in Lewisham, and she told me all about her work. She told me all about how day in, day out, she's supporting women who've come forward because they've experienced domestic abuse and are struggling to like get a proper response from the police or to bring themselves to safety or things like that. And domestic violence, and this is why the Women's Equality Party exists partly, is because domestic violence is one of the most prevalent crimes in our society. Like right now in this country, 1.6 million women are in abusive relationships. 1.6 million. It is one of the biggest crimes that takes place that isn't seriously prioritized. So I met this young woman who has been doing this work, and I just found myself thinking, this is why the politics of women's equality is so important. We need more women like her. Her name is Shireen, doing what they're doing. It's a political issue because you need the governments to acknowledge how serious the problem is and fund the services that will actually really help women and children dealing with that situation. And we were supposed to speak for 45 minutes, but I changed my subsequent meetings because the conversation was so good. And we ended up on chatting for about an hour and a half. And I left there just thinking, right, this work isn't just important, it's essential. And I felt like double, triple focused on making sure that the politics of equality is really mainstreamed so that women like her doing that important work get the support they need and aren't struggling to meet huge demand for their services. It was such a great conversation, such an amazing, an eye-opening opportunity to talk to somebody like that.
Milana, what about you? What's been the highlight of your week?
To be honest, I was like really busy, so I lost the time. And I'm like, oh, when I asked you the question about like what's the highlight of your week, I'm like, I'm still like living in last week's Thursday. I think just like, having a rest like over the weekend because things have been really crazy recently. So just having rest and re-energizing is quite like really essential. So that's been like kind of really highlighting my whole weekend. What about you, Hillary?
You spoke about rest, and that just resonated with me because last week was basically my last week of school for this year, and it just felt so good to be
Yeah,
out, like genuinely just
yeah, definitely.
peaceful.
So do you have to be studying now for exams? No, it's summer holidays, isn't it?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I'm studying. I'm revising for exams and stuff now.
Okay. Well, well done for making it to the end of the year. Because it's been a tough couple of years. I know for young people, the pandemic came along, really interrupted the normal patterns of life, and you guys had to just get back on track. And I know that's not been easy. So enough respect, huh?
Yeah, it must have been hard as well for you as a politician to reach out to people with COVID and all of everything blocking public speaking and stuff.
It was hard. Everything went online, and I love doing stuff in person. And I live alone, right here in my flat, and so there were long periods where I didn't see anybody but my cat. So I'm really glad that we've got the vaccine, which has kept the virus at least a bit under control, which meant we could resume public gatherings and stuff like that. But we got to keep an eye on that stuff because going back up again,
Yeah.
isn't it? COVID, that is.
Yeah,
But yeah, it was tough, but I'm really glad and
yeah.
grateful that things have opened up again. Really glad and grateful.
Yeah, honestly, thank you, Mandu, very much.
Well, thank you for joining us, and that's all for this episode.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening wherever you are. Please subscribe and tell us your opinions and topics you want us to discuss in the future episodes. For more information about the charity, please search up Copper Fact. And for more information on the Women Equality Parties, search up www.womensequality.org.uk and follow them on TikTok. And our sponsors are We Belong 90 on Insta. This has been us, your host, Hillary Kokar and Milana Bout. Thank you. Till next time.